Have you ever stood in front of a mirror, wearing the dress you spent months choosing, feeling like the luckiest woman alive, only to discover that the man waiting for you at the altar had planned your complete destruction? I'm talking about the kind of betrayal that doesn't just break your heart, it shatters every single piece of who you thought you were. My name doesn't matter anymore, because the woman I was on that wedding day no longer exists. And honestly, I'm grateful for that. What matters is what happened to me, what he tried to do to me, and how I refused to let him win. This is my story, and I'm sharing it because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that you can survive anything, even when the person who promised to love you forever becomes the architect of your worst nightmare. I want you to imagine standing there, surrounded by 200 guests, wearing a custom-made wedding gown that cost more than some people's cars, with flowers everywhere, a live orchestra playing, and everyone you've ever loved watching you walk down that aisle. I remember every single detail of that morning. I remember waking up at 5 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, the excitement bubbling in my chest like champagne. I remember my bridesmaids laughing and crying as they helped me into my dress, the way my mother's hands trembled when she placed the veil on my head, the tears streaming down her face as she whispered that I looked like an angel. I remember thinking that this was it. This was the beginning of my forever. The start of the fairy tale I'd been dreaming about since I was a little girl playing with dolls and imagining my Prince Charming. Marcus and I had been together for 4 years before he proposed. 4 years that felt like a beautiful dream where everything just worked. We met at a charity gala where I was working as an event coordinator, and he was there representing his family's investment firm. He was charming, sophisticated, successful, and most importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in me. Not just my appearance, but my thoughts, my dreams, my quirks, everything that made me who I was. He pursued me with the kind of dedication that made me feel special, chosen, treasured. He would show up at my office with my favorite coffee, send me handwritten notes, plan elaborate surprise dates that showed he actually listened when I talked about the things I loved. When he proposed on a rooftop overlooking the city with 1,000 candles and a string quartet playing our song, I didn't hesitate for even a second. I said yes with every fiber of my being, convinced that I had found my person, my partner, my safe place in this chaotic world. The wedding planning had been intense but exciting, though looking back now, I can see the red flags I was too blinded by love to notice. Marcus insisted on controlling every aspect of the wedding, from the guest list to the seating arrangements, from the menu to the music selection. At the time, I thought he was just being involved, showing how much he cared about our special day. I loved that he wanted to be hands-on, that he wasn't one of those grooms who just showed up on the day and let the bride handle everything. But there were moments when his control felt excessive, when he would override my decisions without discussion, when he would dismiss my preferences as if they didn't matter. My best friend Sarah mentioned it once, said something about how Marcus seemed to be planning his wedding rather than our wedding, but I brushed it off, defended him, told her he was just passionate and detail-oriented. God, how I wish I had listened to her. The morning of the wedding, everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect, like someone had orchestrated every single moment to look flawless from the outside. The weather was impossibly beautiful, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that made the outdoor ceremony feel magical. My hair and makeup turned out exactly as I'd envisioned. My dress fit like it had been painted onto my body, and when I looked at myself in that full-length mirror, I barely recognized the radiant woman staring back at me. I felt powerful, beautiful, ready to step into this new chapter of my life with confidence and joy. My father came to get me, and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time since I was a child. He took my hand, squeezed it gently, and told me that he was proud of the woman I'd become, that Marcus was lucky to have me, and that he hoped I would always remember how loved I was. Those words echo in my mind now with a bitter irony that still makes my chest ache. The ceremony venue was stunning. An elegant garden with towering trees draped in twinkling lights, white roses everywhere, and an aisle lined with candles that created a path of light leading to the altar, where Marcus stood waiting. As the music began and I started walking down that aisle, I could feel every eye on me, could hear the gasps and whispers of admiration, could see my mother openly weeping with joy. But the moment that should have been the happiest of my life, the moment when I reached the altar and looked into Marcus's eyes, something felt wrong. His smile was there, perfect and practiced, but his eyes were cold, empty, like he was looking through me rather than at me. I told myself it was just nerves, that he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment, that once we exchanged our vows, everything would feel right again. The officiant began speaking, talking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage, but I could barely focus on the words because something in my gut was screaming that something was terribly, horribly wrong. Marcus took my hands, and they felt ice cold despite the warm afternoon sun. When it came time for his vows, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, and I expected to hear the beautiful promises we'd discussed, the personal moments we'd planned to share. Instead, what came out of his mouth made my blood run cold and my knees go weak. He started by saying he had a confession to make, that he couldn't go through with this ceremony without being completely honest with everyone present. My heart started pounding, confusion and fear mixing into something that made it hard to breathe. He said that he needed everyone to know the truth about who I really was, about the lies I'd been living, about the person hiding behind the beautiful dress and the perfect smile. I stood there frozen, unable to process what was happening, unable to understand why the man I loved was saying these things, why our wedding was turning into something dark and twisted. He told everyone that I had been cheating on him for months, that he had proof, that he had hired a private investigator who had documented everything. He said I was a liar, a manipulator, someone who had used him for his money and his connections, someone who had never truly loved him. The words kept coming, each one landing like a physical blow, and I could feel the shock rippling through the crowd behind me, could hear gasps and whispers turning into murmurs of disbelief. I tried to speak, tried to defend myself, but my voice came out as barely a whisper, my throat constricted with shock and horror. He wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and projected images onto a screen that had mysteriously appeared at the altar, images that showed me with another man, in compromising positions, in situations that looked damning and irrefutable, except none of it was real. The photos were fabricated, manipulated, created through sophisticated editing that made lies look like truth. But standing there in that moment, with 200 pairs of eyes judging me, with my parents' faces crumbling in devastation, with my bridesmaids looking at me with confusion and betrayal, I had no way to prove my innocence. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each accusation, painting a picture of me as a gold digger, a con artist, someone who had carefully planned to trap him into marriage so I could divorce him and take half his fortune. He presented fake text messages, manufactured evidence, a completely fictional narrative that he had constructed with meticulous precision. And I realized with horrifying clarity that this had been his plan all along, that every moment of our relationship had been leading to this, that he had orchestrated the entire thing to humiliate me publicly, to destroy my reputation, to leave me with nothing. The question is, why? What could possibly drive someone to plan such elaborate cruelty? That's the part that haunted me for months afterward. The part that made me question everything I thought I knew about human nature and love and trust. As I stood there at that altar, my perfect wedding dissolving into a nightmare, with people starting to shout questions and accusations, with my mother sobbing and my father's face turning red with rage, I felt something inside me shift. It would have been so easy to collapse, to run away crying, to let him win, to let this moment define me forever. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the shock and the pain and the humiliation, a small voice whispered that I was stronger than this, that I wouldn't let him have the satisfaction of breaking me completely. I looked Marcus directly in the eyes, and despite the tears streaming down my face, despite my whole body shaking, I said one word that changed everything. No. No, I would not accept this narrative. No, I would not let him destroy me. No, I would not stay down. That single word was the first brick in rebuilding my entire life, though I didn't know it yet. The chaos that erupted after that moment is hard to describe because everything happened so fast and yet felt like it was unfolding in agonizing slow motion. My father lunged toward Marcus, held back by my uncle and two groomsmen, his face contorted with rage and pain as he shouted questions that nobody could answer. My mother collapsed into her seat, her carefully applied makeup running down her face in black streams, her hands clutching her chest as if she was having a heart attack. Sarah rushed to my side, grabbing my arm, trying to pull me away from the altar, away from the staring crowds, away from the cameras and phones that had suddenly materialized as guests started recording what was quickly becoming the scandal of the year. I could see people pulling out their phones, capturing my devastation, my humiliation, my complete destruction, and I knew that within hours this would be everywhere, that my nightmare would become entertainment for strangers who didn't know me, who wouldn't care about the truth, who would judge me based on carefully crafted lies. Marcus stood there at the altar, his face a mask of righteous anger and hurt, playing the role of the betrayed groom to perfection, accepting condolences and sympathy from guests who believed his performance without question. Some people were shouting at me, demanding explanations, calling me names that I won't repeat, words that cut deeper than any knife could. Others were crying, devastated by what they thought they had witnessed, mourning the loss of what they believed was a genuine love story. A few, a precious few, looked uncertain, confused, like something about the whole situation didn't quite add up. My bridesmaids were split, some rushing to comfort me while others backed away, their faces showing disappointment and betrayal. I wanted to scream that it was all lies, that none of it was true, that I had been set up, but who would believe me? Marcus had presented evidence, had built a case, had turned my wedding day into a trial where I was already convicted before I could even speak in my own defense. Sarah managed to get me into a back room of the venue, away from the crowds, away from the cameras, away from the judgment and the chaos. I collapsed onto a couch, my expensive wedding dress pooling around me like a white puddle of broken dreams, and for the first time since Marcus had started speaking, I let myself really feel the magnitude of what had just happened. The sobs that came from deep inside me were primal, the kind of crying that shakes your entire body and makes it hard to breathe, the kind of grief that comes from having your entire world demolished in a matter of minutes. Sarah held me, not saying anything, because what could she possibly say? What words exist to comfort someone whose life has just been publicly destroyed by the person they loved most? I don't know how long we sat there, but eventually my mother came in, her face pale and drawn, moving like she had aged 20 years in the last hour. She looked at me with such profound sadness that it broke something else inside me, something I didn't even know could still be broken. She asked me in a voice so quiet I could barely hear it, if any of it was true. And the fact that my own mother had to ask, the fact that even she wasn't sure if she should believe me, was almost worse than everything Marcus had done. I looked at her, my vision blurred with tears, and I told her the truth, that I had never cheated on Marcus, that I had never been with anyone else since we started dating, that everything he showed was fabricated, fake, manufactured to destroy me. I could see her wanting to believe me, but I could also see the doubt in her eyes, the uncertainty that Marcus had planted with his carefully constructed lies. The evidence looked so real, so convincing, and without proof of manipulation, without expert analysis, without time to investigate, how could anyone be certain of the truth? That doubt, that tiny flicker of uncertainty in my own mother's eyes, was the moment I realized the true genius of Marcus's plan. He hadn't just wanted to hurt me, he wanted to make sure that even the people who loved me most would question whether they really knew me at all. The hours after the wedding were a blur of pain and practicality, of trying to figure out what to do next when your entire life has been demolished. Sarah helped me out of my wedding dress, that beautiful gown that now felt like a costume for the worst performance of my life, and into regular clothes that she had somehow thought to bring. We couldn't go back to the apartment I shared with Marcus, couldn't face the life we had built together that was now revealed to be nothing but an elaborate trap. My parents offered to let me come home, but I could still see the uncertainty in their eyes, and I couldn't bear to be around people who weren't completely sure of my innocence. Sarah insisted I come stay with her, and I was too exhausted, too broken to argue. Her apartment was small, a one-bedroom in a less desirable part of the city, but it became my sanctuary, the only place where I felt safe from the judgment and the whispers and the endless speculation about who I really was. That first night, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything but replay the day over and over in my mind, trying to understand how I had missed the signs, how I had fallen in love with someone capable of such calculated cruelty. I kept checking my phone, watching in horror as the story spread across social media, as videos of my humiliation went viral, as strangers who had never met me debated whether I was a victim or a villain. The hashtag that formed around the incident was trending, my face was everywhere, and the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. Guilty. Marcus had given interviews to local news outlets, playing the heartbroken groom, talking about how devastated he was, how he had wanted to believe in me, how difficult it had been to uncover the truth. He was getting sympathy, support, understanding, while I was getting death threats, hateful messages, and accusations that ranged from gold digging to sociopathy. The asymmetry of it was staggering. The way his lies were treated as truth while my truth was dismissed as the desperate claims of someone caught red-handed. I wanted to fight back, to tell my side of the story, to prove that the evidence was fake, but I had no platform, no credibility, no way to make people listen. Every attempt I made to explain what really happened was met with skepticism, with accusations that I was just trying to save face, with comments that I was making things worse for myself by refusing to admit my wrongdoing. The few friends who reached out to me were pressured by their social circles to distance themselves, threatened with guilt by association, warned that supporting me would damage their own reputations. I watched my social circle evaporate in a matter of days, watched people I had known for years block me on every platform, watched my professional network crumble as word spread about the scandal. I lost my job within a week, my boss calling me into her office with an apologetic expression and explaining that the negative publicity was affecting the company, that clients were uncomfortable having me represent them, that it would be best for everyone if I resigned. The unfairness of it made me want to scream, the way I was being punished for something I didn't do, the way Marcus's lies were having real, devastating consequences for my life. I filed for an annulment immediately, hiring the best lawyer I could afford with the little money I had saved, desperate to sever any legal connection to Marcus. But even that process became another battlefield, with Marcus contesting it, dragging it out, making everything as difficult and painful as possible. His lawyers painted me as vindictive, as someone trying to escape responsibility for my actions, as a woman scorned who couldn't accept that her plans had been exposed. The legal fees started piling up, draining my savings, pushing me further into financial instability. I had to sell most of my possessions just to pay for basic necessities, watching my life get smaller and smaller, more confined, more limited. The depression that settled over me during those first weeks was heavy and suffocating, making it hard to get out of bed, hard to see any path forward, hard to imagine that life could ever be anything other than this nightmare. Sarah would try to encourage me, would remind me that I was strong, that I would get through this, but her words felt empty because I didn't feel strong. I felt destroyed, demolished, reduced to nothing by someone who had claimed to love me. Have you ever felt so completely betrayed that you couldn't trust your own judgment anymore? That's where I was, questioning every decision I had ever made, wondering how I could have been so blind, so stupid, so naively trusting of someone who was planning my destruction the entire time. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. You eventually realize that there's nowhere to go but up, that you can either stay down and let the weight of what happened crush you completely, or you can start clawing your way back to the surface, inch by painful inch. The decision to fight back didn't come all at once. It wasn't some dramatic moment of inspiration where I suddenly found my strength and decided to take on the world. It was much more gradual than that. A slow accumulation of small moments where I chose to keep going instead of giving up. The first step was getting out of bed every morning, even when every fiber of my being wanted to stay hidden under the covers forever. The second step was eating, forcing myself to consume food even when everything tasted like ash in my mouth. The third step was showering, maintaining basic hygiene, refusing to let my external appearance reflect the devastation I felt inside. These might seem like insignificant victories, but when you're in the depths of despair, getting through each day without completely falling apart is an achievement worth celebrating. Sarah was instrumental in those early days, refusing to let me wallow completely, pushing me gently to take care of myself, reminding me that I was still a person with value even if the whole world seemed to think otherwise. About 3 weeks after the wedding disaster, something shifted inside me during a particularly dark moment when I was scrolling through social media, reading the hateful comments and the ongoing speculation about my character. I came across a message from someone I didn't know, a woman who said that she had been through something similar, that her ex-husband had fabricated evidence to destroy her during their divorce, and that she had eventually proven his lies and rebuilt her life. She said something that pierced through my despair. The best revenge is becoming someone they can't hurt anymore. Someone so successful and so strong that their lies become irrelevant. Those words lodged themselves in my brain, repeating over and over, and I realized that Marcus's entire plan had been built on the assumption that I would stay down, that I would let his humiliation define me, that I would never recover from what he had done. He wanted me destroyed, broken, unable to function, reduced to nothing. And by staying in that dark place, by refusing to fight back, by accepting the role of victim that he had assigned to me, I was giving him exactly what he wanted. That realization made something inside me harden, made me angry in a productive way for the first time since the wedding. I decided right then, sitting on Sarah's couch in my pajamas with unbrushed hair and eyes swollen from crying, that I would not let Marcus win. I would rebuild my life from scratch if I had to, but I would rebuild it in a way that proved every single thing he said about me was wrong. I would become successful not just in spite of what he did, but because of it. using his cruelty as fuel for my transformation. This decision was terrifying because I had no idea how to actually accomplish it. No clear path forward, no obvious next steps. I was broke, unemployed, socially ostracized, and legally still connected to a man who had made it his mission to ruin me. But I had something else. I had survived the worst thing I could imagine, and I was still breathing, still thinking, still capable of making choices about my future. If I could survive what Marcus did to me, I could survive anything. The rebuilding process started with the most basic foundation. I needed to prove my innocence, or at least create reasonable doubt about Marcus's accusations. This meant hiring a forensic digital expert who could analyze the photos and evidence Marcus had presented, someone who could demonstrate that they had been manipulated. The problem was that this kind of expertise was expensive, far more expensive than I could afford with my depleted savings and non-existent income. I spent days researching, making calls, explaining my situation to anyone who might be able to help, and eventually I found someone who agreed to look at the evidence on a payment plan because they were intrigued by the case and believed my story. Dr. Patricia Chen was a forensic imaging specialist who had testified in numerous legal cases involving fabricated evidence, and when she examined the photos Marcus had presented, it took her less than an hour to identify the manipulation. She found digital artifacts, inconsistencies in lighting and shadows, metadata that proved the images had been created weeks before the incidents they supposedly documented, and software fingerprints that indicated sophisticated editing tools had been used. Her report was comprehensive, technical, and irrefutable. The evidence Marcus had used to destroy me was completely fabricated. Having this proof was vindicating on a personal level, but getting anyone to pay attention to it was another challenge entirely. The media outlets that had covered the wedding scandal weren't interested in a follow-up story about a wronged bride. That narrative didn't generate the same clicks and engagement as the original story of betrayal and deception. I reached out to journalists, bloggers, anyone with a platform, trying to get someone to cover the truth, but most ignored me or said they didn't have the resources to investigate further. The public had already made up their minds about who I was, and people rarely want to admit they were wrong about something they believed so strongly. This is when I learned an important lesson about public perception and social media. If you want to control your narrative, you have to create your own platform. You have to tell your own story. You can't wait for someone else to do it for you. I had never been particularly interested in content creation or social media beyond the basics, but I realized it was the only way to reach people directly, to bypass the traditional gatekeepers who weren't interested in giving me a voice. Sarah suggested I start a YouTube channel, documenting my experience and my journey to rebuild my life, and initially I thought the idea was absurd. Why would anyone want to watch or listen to me? Why would people care about my story when they had already decided I was the villain? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my story wasn't just about me. It was about the countless people who had been falsely accused, publicly humiliated, or destroyed by someone they trusted. If I could share my experience authentically, if I could show the process of rebuilding and proving my innocence, maybe it would resonate with others who felt similarly powerless in the face of injustice. Starting the channel was harder than I expected, both technically and emotionally. I had to learn about equipment, lighting, editing, algorithms, all while fighting the voice in my head that said nobody would believe me, nobody would care, nobody would watch. My first video was shaky, poorly lit, and emotionally raw, filmed on Sarah's phone in her living room. I told my story from beginning to end, showed Dr. Chen's report, and explained how Marcus had fabricated everything. I was terrified to put it out there, to make myself vulnerable again after everything that had happened, but I hit publish and waited to see what would happen. The response was not what I expected. The video got a few hundred views initially, mostly from people who had followed the original scandal and were curious about my side, and the comments were mixed. Some people were supportive, some were still skeptical, and some were outright cruel, continuing to attack me and dismiss my evidence. But then something shifted. The video got picked up by a few influencers who had large followings and who were interested in stories about injustice and redemption. They shared it, analyzed it, discussed it with their audiences, and suddenly my story was reaching millions of people instead of hundreds. The tide of public opinion began to turn, slowly at first, then more rapidly as more people examined the evidence and realized that Marcus's accusations didn't hold up under scrutiny. Comment below if you've ever had to fight to prove your innocence when everyone already believed the lies about you. The growth of my YouTube channel was surreal and overwhelming, going from a few hundred subscribers to tens of thousands within weeks. and continuing to grow exponentially as my story resonated with people around the world. I started receiving messages from people who had experienced similar situations, who had been falsely accused or publicly humiliated, who felt like nobody believed them or cared about the truth. These messages became my lifeline during the difficult days when I questioned whether putting myself out there was worth the continued attacks and skepticism from people who refused to accept that they had been wrong about me. I began creating more content, not just about my specific situation with Marcus, but about the broader themes of rebuilding your life after devastation, overcoming public humiliation, and finding your strength when everything has been taken from you. I interviewed experts on narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, and psychological manipulation, trying to understand not just what had happened to me, but why Marcus had done it. What kind of person plans that level of cruelty against someone they claim to love? The psychological analysis revealed that Marcus likely had significant narcissistic personality traits, that our entire relationship had probably been a performance designed to fulfill his need for control and his enjoyment of manipulation. The wedding humiliation wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of a long-term plan to exercise ultimate control over me, to demonstrate his power by building me up and then destroying me publicly. Understanding this didn't make the pain go away, but it did help me realize that nothing I had done or failed to do had caused this. Marcus would have done this to whoever he was with because the cruelty was about him, not about me. As my platform grew, opportunities started coming my way that I never could have imagined during those dark weeks after the wedding. Brands wanted to work with me, seeing my story as inspiring and my audience as engaged and loyal. Media outlets that had ignored my attempts to share the truth suddenly wanted interviews, wanting to be part of the redemption narrative they had missed initially. I was invited to speak at events about resilience and overcoming adversity, sharing my story with live audiences who responded with standing ovations and tears. Each of these opportunities felt like a validation, a proof that I had been right to keep fighting, right to refuse to stay down, right to believe that the truth would eventually matter. But beyond the external validation, the real transformation was happening internally, in the way I viewed myself and my capabilities. I was discovering strengths I never knew I had, developing skills I never thought I would need, and building a confidence that came from surviving something that should have destroyed me. The woman who had stood at that altar, confused and devastated by her groom's betrayal, felt like a different person entirely from the woman I was becoming. I was fiercer now, more resilient, less willing to accept anything less than I deserved, and far more aware of red flags and manipulation tactics. I started a consulting business helping other people navigate similar situations, offering services that combined legal support connections, digital forensics recommendations, media strategy advice, and psychological counseling referrals. The business grew organically from the community I had built on YouTube, from people who trusted me because I had been through what they were experiencing, because I understood the specific pain of public humiliation and false accusations. Within 6 months, I was making more money than I had ever made in my previous career, working with clients around the world, making a real difference in people's lives while simultaneously building something that was entirely mine, something that Marcus couldn't touch or claim or destroy. The financial independence was important, but the emotional independence was even more crucial. I no longer needed anyone to believe me for my sense of self-worth to be intact. I knew my truth, I had proven it to the people who mattered, and anyone who still wanted to believe Marcus's lies was irrelevant to my life and my happiness. The legal battle with Marcus continued for nearly a year, his lawyers using every delay tactic and procedural maneuver to drag out the annulment and make the process as expensive and painful as possible. But I had Dr. Chen's forensic report, I had growing public support, and I had documentation of every lie Marcus had told. Eventually, his own lawyers advised him to settle because the evidence of fabrication was too strong, and continuing to fight would only make him look worse as more details came to light. The settlement gave me everything I wanted: a quick annulment, no financial obligations to Marcus, and most importantly, a written acknowledgement that the evidence he had presented at the wedding was fabricated and that his accusations were false. This acknowledgement didn't undo the damage he had caused, didn't erase the pain and humiliation, didn't give me back the months of my life I had spent fighting to prove my innocence, but it was official, legal, documented proof that I had been telling the truth all along. I shared the settlement details on my YouTube channel, and the response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments celebrating this victory, sharing in my vindication, expressing relief that justice had finally been served, even if it had taken far too long. Some people wanted me to go after Marcus more aggressively, to sue him for defamation, to make him pay financially for what he had done, but I realized that continuing to fight him, continuing to make him central to my story, would only keep me tethered to that nightmare. The best revenge wasn't destroying him. It was building a life so fulfilling and successful that what he had tried to do to me became nothing more than a footnote in my story rather than the defining chapter. I focused instead on growing my business, expanding my YouTube content, and developing new programs to help people rebuild their lives after public scandals or false accusations. I wrote a book about my experience, not just the dramatic story of the wedding disaster, but the practical strategies I had used to rebuild my life, the psychological tools that had helped me process the trauma, and the lessons I had learned about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of controlling your own narrative. The book became a bestseller, resonating with people far beyond those who had followed my specific story, reaching anyone who had ever felt destroyed by circumstances beyond their control and needed hope that rebuilding was possible. I was invited to give a TED Talk about overcoming public humiliation in the digital age, and standing on that stage, sharing my story with thousands of people in the audience and millions more who would watch online, I felt the full weight of how far I had come from that devastated bride standing at the altar. My parents, who had initially struggled with doubt about my innocence, became my biggest supporters once the truth was irrefutable, apologizing for their uncertainty and expressing pride in how I had handled everything. My mother told me that watching me rebuild my life had taught her things about strength and resilience that she wished she had known when she was younger, that I had become someone she looked up to rather than just someone she had raised. That conversation healed something between us that had been fractured since the wedding, restoring a trust and closeness that I had feared was permanently damaged. The friendships I had lost during the scandal were mostly irretrievable, and I realized I didn't actually want to rebuild connections with people who had abandoned me so quickly, who had believed the worst about me without giving me a chance to defend myself. Instead, I built new friendships with people who knew my full story from the beginning, who had seen me at my lowest and had chosen to support me anyway, who valued authenticity and loyalty and truth. Sarah remained my closest friend, the person who had literally saved my life by refusing to let me give up, and I made sure she knew how grateful I was for her unwavering support. I hired her to help manage my growing business, wanting to share my success with the person who had shared my darkest moments. About 18 months after the wedding disaster, I was invited to speak at a high-profile business conference, and as I was backstage preparing for my presentation, someone told me that Marcus was in the audience. My first reaction was panic, a visceral fear response that reminded me I still carried trauma from what he had done even though I had come so far. My hands started shaking, my heart rate increased, and I considered backing out of the speaking engagement entirely, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of seeing me again, not wanting to risk him disrupting my presentation or causing another scene. But then I realized that running away from him, letting his presence control my choices, was exactly what he would want, was giving him power over me that he didn't deserve. I took several deep breaths, reminded myself of everything I had built, everything I had overcome, and I walked onto that stage with my head held high. My presentation was about building resilient businesses after personal or public setbacks, using my own story as a case study but focusing more on the practical strategies than the dramatic details. I could see Marcus sitting in the third row, his face unreadable, and I made a conscious choice not to let his presence affect my delivery. I spoke with confidence and authority, sharing insights I had gained through my experience, offering practical advice to entrepreneurs facing their own challenges, and the audience response was enthusiastic and engaged. When I finished, there was sustained applause, and multiple people approached me afterward wanting to continue the conversation or explore potential collaborations. Marcus waited until most of the crowd had dispersed, and then he approached me, his expression carefully neutral, but his body language suggesting discomfort. He asked if we could talk privately, and every instinct told me to refuse, to walk away, to maintain the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. But I was also curious about what he possibly had to say, what words he thought could bridge the chasm between us, whether he had any understanding of the magnitude of what he had done. We went to a quiet corner of the conference venue, and for a moment we just stood there looking at each other, two people who had once planned to spend their lives together, now virtual strangers shaped by trauma and conflict. Marcus started by saying that he had been following my success, that he had seen my YouTube channel and read my book, that he was impressed by what I had built. The words felt empty, performative, like he was reading from a script rather than speaking from genuine feeling. Then he said something that revealed he still didn't truly understand what he had done. He asked if there was any chance we could reconcile, could start over, could try again now that things had calmed down. The audacity of the question, the complete lack of awareness about the irreparable damage he had caused, the assumption that I would even consider being with someone who had orchestrated my public destruction was so absurd that I almost laughed. But instead, I looked at him with the clarity that comes from surviving something terrible and coming out stronger on the other side, and I told him exactly what I thought. I said that what he did to me at our wedding wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding or something that could be forgiven and forgotten. It was deliberate, calculated cruelty designed to destroy me completely. And the fact that his plan had failed, that I had rebuilt my life into something better than it was before, didn't diminish the severity of his actions. I told him that I had spent months trying to understand why he did it, what I had done to deserve such treatment, what was wrong with me that had made him want to hurt me so badly. But I had eventually realized that his actions weren't about me at all. They were about his own brokenness, his own need for control, his own inability to genuinely connect with another human being. I told him that I forgave him, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because carrying anger and hatred was exhausting and unproductive. But that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation or trust or any kind of relationship. I wished him well in finding the help he clearly needed to address whatever psychological issues had led him to do what he did, and then I walked away, leaving him standing there with whatever emotions my words had triggered. That confrontation with Marcus was closure in a way I hadn't expected, the final piece of healing I needed to fully move forward without looking back. Seeing him again and realizing that I felt nothing, not love, not hate, not even really anger anymore, just a detached sort of pity for someone so damaged that they could plan something so cruel, showed me how completely I had transformed from the woman who had loved him. The victim he had tried to create no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, more successful, and genuinely happy in ways I never was during our relationship. My life now is beyond anything I could have imagined during those dark weeks after the wedding, beyond the dreams I had when I was planning to marry Marcus, and thought that would be the pinnacle of my happiness. My business is thriving, with a team of employees helping me serve clients around the world, generating income that gives me financial security and independence. My YouTube channel has millions of subscribers who engage with my content regularly, who share their own stories of resilience and rebuilding, who have created a community of support that extends far beyond my original intentions. I've been featured in major media outlets, invited to speak at prestigious events, and recognized as an expert in helping people overcome public scandals and false accusations. But more than the external success, the internal transformation is what matters most. I trust myself now in ways I never did before, confident in my judgment and my ability to identify red flags and manipulation tactics. I have clear boundaries and I enforce them without guilt or apology, unwilling to accept treatment that doesn't reflect my worth. I've learned that the opinions of strangers, even thousands or millions of them, matter far less than the opinions of the few people who truly know and love me. I've discovered that rock bottom can be a solid foundation for rebuilding something better than what you lost, that sometimes destruction is necessary for transformation, that the worst thing that ever happened to you can become the catalyst for the best version of yourself. The woman who stood at that altar, wearing a wedding dress and expecting forever, was naive and trusting and believed that love was enough to protect you from cruelty. The woman I am now knows better, knows that love without respect and honesty and genuine care is just manipulation wearing a prettier mask. I date now carefully and selectively, with standards that some people consider too high, but that I know are exactly what I deserve. I've learned to recognize genuine connection versus performed charm, authentic interest versus strategic planning, real partnership versus control disguised as care. And when I do find someone worthy of my trust, if I do, because I'm also perfectly content building my life alone, they will get the best version of me, the resilient, successful, confident woman who knows her worth and won't settle for anything less than she deserves. My story isn't just about what Marcus tried to do to me at our wedding. It's about what I chose to do afterward, how I refused to let his cruelty define me, how I built something he couldn't touch or destroy no matter how hard he tried. It's about the power we all have to write our own narratives even when someone else has tried to write them for us, to rebuild even when rebuilding seems impossible, to rise even when staying down would be easier. Your life isn't determined by what happens to you, but by how you respond to what happens to you, and I chose to respond with resilience, with determination, with an unwavering belief that I deserved better than the role Marcus had assigned me. So here's what I want you to take away from my story, and this is important. So I need you to really understand this. Whoever tried to destroy you, whoever humiliated you, whoever told lies about you, whoever made you feel like you would never recover from what they did, They don't get to win unless you let them. The power to rebuild your life, to prove them wrong, to become someone they can't touch, has always been inside you, waiting for you to access it. It won't be easy, it won't be quick, and there will be days when giving up seems like the only option. But I promise you that if you keep going, if you refuse to stay down, if you build something that's entirely yours, you will look back one day and realize that their worst attempt at destroying you actually became the foundation for your greatest success. My life is proof of that, living testimony that you can survive anything and come out stronger on the other side. Now I want to hear from you, because your voice matters, your story matters, and sharing our experiences helps all of us feel less alone in our struggles. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to destroy your reputation or your life? How did you handle it? What strategies did you use to rebuild? Comment below with your experiences, because I read every single comment and I'm building a community here of people who refuse to let circumstances define them, who choose resilience over victimhood, who understand that the best revenge is a life well lived. If this story touched you, if it resonated with something you've experienced, if it gave you hope that rebuilding is possible, please leave a like on this video. The algorithm uses likes to determine which videos to promote to more people, and the more people who see this content, the more lives we can potentially impact. The more people we can reach who are in those dark moments right after their world has been destroyed and need to know that recovery is possible. I encourage you to subscribe to I Live to Tell if you want more stories like this one. More content about resilience and rebuilding and refusing to let life's worst moments define who you become. We share stories every week from people who have overcome tremendous obstacles, who have rebuilt after devastation, who have proven that the human spirit is far more resilient than we often give it credit for. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss any new uploads, because each story might be exactly what someone needs to hear at exactly the right moment. And by sharing and engaging with this content, you become part of a movement that says we refuse to stay down, we refuse to accept defeat, we refuse to let anyone else determine our worth or our future. Thank you for listening to my story, for being part of this journey, and for choosing to be someone who builds others up rather than tears them down. Remember, the person who tried to destroy you is watching your success from a distance, and the best thing you can do is live so well that they realize their attempt at breaking you actually made you unbreakable. Until next time, keep fighting, keep building, and keep proving that you're stronger than anything life throws at you.